Hello, I'm Kerry Shamblin, and I practice jyotisha, also known as Vedic Astrology. I have been offering a monthly forecast since 1999 where I track how the planets are moving through the sky and how they may be affecting our life on Earth. I also work directly with others through counseling, teaching, and mentoring. Hello, this is Kerry. Welcome to the November 2025 monthly Vedic Astrology forecast. We are going to start out with a summary from each of the 9 planets. The Sun. Emerging from debilitation, the Sun enters Scorpio on November 16th, joining Mars and stirring courage to face uncertainty. This month's solar current encourages deep work, uncovering truth, confronting fear, and reclaiming purpose from chaos. The Moon lights up Aries for the November 5th full moon, sparking action and emotional honesty. The waning moon slides into Scorpio for the new moon on November 19th, inviting surrender and inner renewal. Emotional tides run strong. Find rest and trust intuition. Mars anchors the month in his home sign of Scorpio, a position of potency and focus. Strategic, protective, and fierce, Mars calls for honest confrontation with power and purpose. Channel intensity toward transformation rather than control. Mercury's retrograde from November 9th through the 29th retraces steps through Scorpio and back into Libra, unraveling details and highlighting communication mishaps. This cycle demands shifting perspective about what is said, what is meant, and what is worth working on. Clarity returns as Mercury stations direct toward month's end. Jupiter. Beginning a retrograde cycle at 1 degree Cancer on November 11th, Jupiter returns to Gemini by December 5th. His retreat from the threshold of Cancer could amplify both emotion and introspection. Expect insights on growth, education, and long-term direction as Jupiter rewires wisdom from within. Venus. Well appointed in Libra through November 25th, Venus restores connection, balance, and beauty. Her shift to Scorpio sends our hearts deeper as we move toward December. Creative collaboration turns intimate and profound. Trust the power of love as a regenerative force. Saturn stations direct at 1 degrees Pisces on November 28th, promising some long-range structure and responsibility after months of revision and uncertainty. Lessons learned through pressure now become tools for steady progress. Build what will endure the tides. Rahu continues in Aquarius, amplifying collective focus on innovation, networks, and social systems. Desire leans toward collaboration, but beware of digital or ideological overwhelm. Ketu in Leo continues to trim and curb ego excess, refining purpose and authenticity. Release the need to perform. Return instead to creative essence and quiet conviction. For an in-depth analysis of specific planetary placements, please continue listening to the full planetary forecast. Full moon in Aries on November 5th. The moon events of November bring Mars into play, with the full moon blazing through the stars of Aries, Mars's fire sign, on November 5th, and then the new moon joining the Sun and Mercury in Scorpio Mars's water sign, on November 19th. Mars is the planet of power, strategy, and protection, as well as the planet associated with the fire element. After the new moon in Libra on October 21st, both Mercury and Mars moved toward the border into Scorpio with the moon, who continues to wax as October turns to November, moving through the zone occupied by Rahu and Saturn from October 31st to November 4th, which matters because the moon interacting with either of those planets can bring added instability, like Rahu, or pressure from Saturn. As soon as the moon clears Pisces, we set up for the full moon at sunrise on Tuesday, November 5th. Both Mercury and Mars are strongly stationed in Mars's other sign, Scorpio, while the Sun and Venus in Libra oppose the moon in Aries. The moon's own sign of Cancer is currently benefiting from Jupiter's visit, the Big Helper, who is setting up a water sign connection to retrograde Saturn in Pisces and to the industrious duo of Mercury and Mars in Scorpio. This could stir some things up, exposing unseen possibilities while helping others to flow or blow away. The Sun and Moon are bringing attention to the dynamic, dramatic, and very human sign of Aries and Libra. The Moon in Aries is a feminine and vulnerable energy placed in a masculine environment. And the Sun in Libra is a masculine energy debilitated in an idealistic sign ruled by feminine Venus, who is also placed in Libra. Without having to tally who has the upper hand, realize that this study of both feminine and masculine forms of expression could lead to the conclusion that we need to make room for all of it. This is the time to firm up plans with the information you do have. This could be a moment of clarity that begs for more assurance. When in doubt, favor the solution that is best for the collective, however small or large. Venus is strong in Libra, championing the idea that relationships, collectives, communities, and connection create strength and resilience. The moon will be in Bharani Nakshatra, whose symbol is the creative feminine yoni. Bharani is placed completely within Mars's sign of Aries, and it also associates with the planet Venus, making Bharani a passionate, creative, and dynamic nakshatra. We may feel some fiery and juicy inspiration at this time. Try to harness the ideas and brainstorms that bubble up, as they may continue to apply for some time in the near future. Mercury retrograde, November 9th through the 29th. As the moon begins to wane, tides begin to turn in Scorpio, where Mercury sets up for a retrograde phase on November 9th that takes him from 13 degrees Scorpio back into Libra on November 23rd, stationing direct at 27 degrees Libra on November 29th. Retrograde planets in general bring a wild energy that makes predicting how they will influence very tricky. Retrograde motion is called apparent due to the fact that it is only in our observation that the planet appears to move back through recently traversed territory. When the planet goes direct, it moves for a third time over the same little patch of the zodiac. Identifying what that little patch of the zodiac means to your chart can help to zone into what maybe start jiggling during this retrograde phase. Mercury's skill set includes communications, management, learning, digestion, analysis, processing for storage, and organization. Many of the faculties that really help us to get through the details of each day fall under Mercury's umbrella. When retrograde comes on, we may have our Mercury go on hyperdrive, missing some details, focusing on the wrong issues, and communicating without filters. The first 2 weeks of this retrograde cycle have Mercury retracing his steps through Scorpio. It may feel like puzzle pieces are being knocked off the table by the cat's tail, making it hard to see how everything is supposed to fit together. The ensuing disorganization could feel frustrating, but the call is to check under the table and the rugs for those missing pieces. What feels like a setback could lead you to solutions that are better and easier in the long run compared to the direction you were heading. Slow down, pay attention, and find a way to align the data with your intuitive perceptions. Look for an interesting social or creative do-over opportunity between November 23rd and 25th. Mercury backs into Libra on November 23rd, meeting up with Venus, who advances past Mercury and into Scorpio on November 25th. This little do-si-do could result in a positive exchange that keeps the inspirational fires burning, despite an unwelcome bout of problem solving ahead. Jupiter retrograde in Cancer from November 11th through March 11th. Further stretching possibilities. Jupiter joins his faithful student Mercury into retrograde motion, beginning at 1 degree Cancer on November 11th, returning back to Gemini on December 5th, and maintaining retrograde through March 11th, where he will stop at 21 degrees Gemini and resume direct motion. We get messaging about growth, natural science, wisdom, and purpose from Jupiter. The first few weeks of retrograde shows Jupiter just barely peeping into his exaltation sign of Cancer, a preview into next year's Jupiter in Cancer transit that will begin at the end of May 2026. The retrograde portion in Cancer through December 5th could show a quick unraveling of what may have glimmered forth as positive hope. From November 11th to November 28th, both Jupiter and Saturn, the big bosses of the planet teams, will be in retrograde motion. Each of these impactive planets does take a retrograde phase each year. Some years they overlap for months. This year it will be an overlap of just over 2 weeks. And simultaneously, Mercury will be retrograde during this time, creating a 3-pointed churn in the early degrees of the water signs. Jupiter will continue retrograde through March 11th, mostly in the sign of Gemini. So let's focus now on the November portion of this transit, when Jupiter, Mercury, and Saturn will all be retrograde in water signs. From November 11th, when Jupiter starts a retrograde cycle, to November 28th, when Saturn resumes direct motion, we will have this triple crown of retrograde motion churning up the water signs. And based on the current position of both Jupiter and Saturn, the very early degrees of Pisces and Cancer may feel these waves the most. Jupiter and Saturn are only retrograde in tandem for 2 weeks this year, with the added feature of Jupiter finally aspecting Saturn, and not vice versa, since July 2015, when Jupiter was in Cancer and Saturn was in Scorpio. How interesting that for the extent of time since Jupiter exited Cancer in July of 2015, that there has been no instance of Jupiter aspecting to Saturn. The two did conjoin in Capricorn in December of 2020, but Saturn dominated Jupiter then, due to being in his own sign while Jupiter was debilitated. Saturn's prominence over Jupiter has continued since 2020. Looking ahead to the next 12 years, we have a different story. Once Jupiter transits to Cancer for his main transit there starting in May of 2026, there are many instances of Jupiter aspecting Saturn, giving Jupiter more clout until Jupiter regains Cancer in September 2037. In a broad way, we could say that between 2015 and 2026, Saturn was stronger with regards to influencing Jupiter. From 2026 through 2037, Jupiter will gain the upper hand with regards to influencing Saturn. Jupiter is positive, growth-oriented, and expansive. Saturn is contractive, slow, and limiting. Depending on the roles of these two outer planets, this little section of time in mid-November 2025 could produce some clues about how this next 12 years may proceed for both individuals and the collective. The next great conjunction, when time-related Saturn and space-holding Jupiter come together, will be on October 31st, 2040. This is good broad strokes planning information for you long game crowd. The Sun transits Scorpio November 16th through December 15th. The Sun glides out of debilitation in Libra and into the big waves of early degrees Scorpio on November 16th, spending the month regaining connections to intel and refitting logistical procedures in the face of times that could feel very unstable, with undertow, shifting sands, and navigational challenges. Retrograde Mercury slips past the Sun and back into Libra, putting the friendly planets Venus and Mercury into range for banding together from November 23rd through the 25th, which could look like repairing connections, updating contracts, and generating new sources of business or relationships. As the Sun advances into Scorpio, he follows Mars into the swampy environment that demands life and death problem solving. The commanding pair of Mars and Sun together, delving beneath the surface to courageously find solutions and identify deeply rooted problems, could feel both unsettling and comforting. The final 2 weeks of November, with the retrograde undertow creating a feeling of power vacuum, the Sun, as leader, could feel threatened, leaving many reacting with fear and aggression. Scorpio is a good environment for both hiding things under the surface and for exposing that which has been obscured. Expect a flurry of secrets attempting to stay hidden, while there is a coordinated team working to expose rotten foundations. By the end of the Sun's Scorpio transit in mid-December, Mars exits to Sagittarius, and the Sun is joined by the helpers, Mercury and Venus. Both Mercury and Saturn will have regained direct motion. Expect some messy instability through the end of November, and be ready to mine for clarity in the details that will be instrumental in pulling you out of troubled waters come December. New moon in Scorpio, November 19th. The smiling moon slides into Scorpio on November 19th, lining up with the Sun at 4 degrees. Similar to the new moon of October 21st, the grouping around this new moon includes Mercury and Mars. What's different is that both Mars and Venus will be strongly placed in their own signs, and retrograde Jupiter from nascent Cancer is extending his wiggly positivity onto the Sun and Moon combination. Keep in mind that in addition to the Moon struggling energetically during each and every new moon, the Moon will be deeply debilitated at this one, adding to the struggle. while at the same time, we are feeling those waves from the 3 retrograde planets cutting it up in the water signs. All of this adds up to a heads up right now as you schedule your month ahead. After the first week of November, you may start feeling those surges and notice a crack or two in some facade or even deeper structure. With Mercury retrograde starting on November 9th, Jupiter retrograde starting on November 11th, and the Sun shifting to Scorpio on November 16th, the new moon on November 19th could feel like a moment of surrender. Create cushions in your schedule during this time. Provide ample space and time to curl up and turn inward. Also different from the October new moon is the status of Mars and Venus, who rule power and connection, respectively. Mars in Scorpio gives access to the depths of feminine power in the watery sign of Scorpio, which is co-ruled by strong Mars and intuitive Ketu. Look for what anchors you to your own internal source of power. Trust your intuitive hits and find a way for that information to become practical and applicable. Venus will be alone in Libra, her own sign, receiving a direct aspect from Rahu in Aquarius. See this as tapping into a raw creative force that is fed by desire for collective welfare and success. Tribal connections and collective inspiration create resilience and rejuvenation. The only constant is change. To resist it is to lose energy by creating opposition to the inevitable. Look forward and inward to recalibrate your compass and set new courses that are situationally appropriate. Venus enters Scorpio November 25th. As the moon waxes, Venus moves out of Rahu's gaze and into the challenging waters of Scorpio on November 25th, joining forces with the individualistic Sun and intense, resourceful Mars, seeking to consolidate power in murky circumstances. As a feminine voice, Venus's entrance into Scorpio could feel like a moment of fate, like Daniel's vulnerable entrance into the lion's den. Retrograde Jupiter extends a channel of protection toward Venus in this moment, showing us all that some form of faith can keep us safe and see us through a dark night. Do recall that Venus plunging into Scorpio comes directly after an intense reunion with retrograde Mercury at the very last few degrees of Libra from November 23rd through the 25th. Let's take note that we have a very empowered Venus launching into Scorpio, having gained juice while moving through her own sign of Libra and amplified by Rahu's rocky desire. Mercury rejoins Venus in Scorpio by early December, and the friendly pair gets some alone time in Scorpio after the Sun exits on December 15th. See, this is a pocket where you may want to carve out some time to go deep with creative pursuits, business planning, and the year ahead strategy. Venus moves out of Scorpio on December 19th. See this transit as starting off with a leap on November 25th and finding creative solutions in unexpected places by mid-November. Think about those Jupiter and Cancer inspired pathways that could inform the next 12 years, launching in 2026. Saturn direct at 1 degree Pisces, November 28th. Saturn's journey in 2025 thus far has looked like this. As the year unfolded, Saturn was at about 23 degrees Aquarius, finishing off an extended transit through his own signs, which started in late January 2020, when Saturn entered Capricorn. By March 29th, Saturn entered Pisces, creating some intensity due to Rahu's presence also in the early degrees of Pisces. This combination lasted a couple months until Rahu finally moved in his regulation retrograde motion into Aquarius, his own sign, where he will be through late 2026. After Saturn advanced a bit into Pisces, making space between him and Rahu, he began a retrograde cycle on July 12th at 8 degrees Pisces, while in the nakshatra Uttarabhadra, which forms a pair with the adjacent nakshatra Purvabhadra, which is right where Saturn will resume direct motion on November 28th at 1 degree Pisces. The clue here is to look back at early July and remember what your long-term vision was telling you at that time. Saturn's role amongst the planets is to create boundaries, structure, and definition, which on one hand can inform a practical approach toward a goal, informed by responsibility and accountability, and on the other hand can feel pressurizing, restrictive, punishing, and oppressive. Saturn's approach is deliberate, slow, long-term, and conservative. When Saturn's retrograde comes along each year, which is about 4 to 4.5 months, roughly a third of our lives, the predictable and steady structure of Saturn's routines can be disrupted. This means that the contracts we rely on to keep stability in place could suddenly be void and discarded, converting responsible procedure into unstable dysfunction. Saturn loves to expose the deep practical flaws in our behavior and actions. When Saturn retrograde turns on each year, we have an opportunity to loosen our routines enough to see if our habits and desires are still working to support our direction. This retrograde instability of Saturn can be unsettling but informative, pushing us to discard what is actually harmful and seeking to find the roots of what can be cultivated as useful and sustainable. On November 28th, dear Saturn stops and returns to direct motion at 1 degree Pisces, the final sign of the zodiac whose ruler is expansive Jupiter, coincidentally at 1 degree Cancer, also in retrograde motion and aspecting Saturn, as mentioned earlier, for the first time in 10 years. This brings back the reference to the nakshatras Purvabhadra and Uttarabhadra, adjacent zones at the end of the zodiac that really call on us to register the combined messages of Saturn and Jupiter. That seems like a lot to take in. And if we zoom out to the very Saturn-Jupiter themes that are swirling here, we may be able to get some definition in this picture. Saturn and Jupiter together weave the fabric of time and space. As the two furthest planets our human eyes can connect with, we see far out Saturn creating a boundary for our solar system, bringing our attention to long cycles, karmic experience, and the inevitable march of time. Jupiter's expansive presence creates our sense of boundless space and endless possibility that bounces against the confining reality of Saturn's limitation. While this slow rolling pivot point will affect us differently as individuals, the collective call seems to be toward regaining our direction toward responsible, sustainable actions that guide and protect positive growth. This could mean letting go of structures that are familiar but no longer supportive. This could mean releasing growth avenues that held promise but aren't producing, which could begin to become more clear as Saturn resumes direct motion, and Jupiter begins to retrograde back toward Gemini. Jupiter's retrograde period while in Gemini from December 5th through March 11th looks fantastic for redesigning businesses and educational trajectories. With both Saturn and Jupiter retrograde in tandem from November 11th through the 28th, if possible, hold off on important long-term decisions until Saturn gets back on his paddleboard and Jupiter returns to Gemini, which is after the first week in December. Mercury direct in Libra, November 29th. Further emphasizing the advice to slow down, take stock, and wait for serious contracts and decisions. We have Mercury resuming direct motion at 27 degrees Libra on November 29th. Mercury is capable at this point in the zodiac and will quickly reset, helping us all to reorganize, reconnect, and regain momentum. Direct moving Mercury will spend about a week in Libra before advancing into Scorpio on December 6th, shifting our focus inward toward deep solutions, intuitive communication, and efficient transactions. Overall, November offers some murky and churning waters that could feel intimidating in the moment. Instability does serve to highlight that which is supportive and reliable in the midst of disaster or dissolution. We recalibrate, reorganize, and redirect our energy this month. Address the exposed foundations, repair leaks, and shore up your relationship to purpose. December 2025 headlines. Full moon at 4 degrees Taurus on December 4th. Retrograde Jupiter re-enters Gemini on December 5th. Mercury transits Scorpio December 6th through the 28th. Mars transits Sagittarius December 7th through January 15th. The Sun transits Sagittarius December 15th through January 14th. We've got a new moon at 4 degrees Sagittarius on December 19th. Venus will transit Sagittarius December 19th through January 12th, and Mercury will transit Sagittarius December 28th through January 16th. Thank you so much for hanging in there with this long forecast. Hope it was helpful for you, and I will be back for the December forecast at the end of November. Take care. Thank you for listening to this presentation. If you are interested in following my work, look for Kerry Shamblin Astrology on YouTube, Spotify, Patreon, Facebook, and Instagram. My monthly forecast is published in written and audio format on my website, planetaryinfluence.com, where you can join my email list or book a one-on-one session with me. My goal is to light your path toward a joyful and liberated life experience.